Eleanor Whitmore adjusted her glasses and looked directly at Delia Wheeler before opening the file. The room already felt poisoned. Vanessa sat stiffly in her cream designer suit, fake tears drying perfectly beneath expensive mascara. Ryan leaned back in his chair like he was waiting for a business deal to close. And beside Delia, Cody suddenly looked more interested in her than he had in months. For 20 years, Eleanor began calmly. Harold and Evelyn Wheeler documented who cared for them and who merely visited twice a year. The air changed instantly. Then came the sentence that shattered the family forever. The family home, the investment accounts, and controlling interest in the Wheeler Trust will go to Delia Wheeler. Ryan slammed both hands onto the table. "Oh, you manipulative little bitch." Vanessa's face went white, and Cody. Cody looked at Delia like he had just realized she was worth something after all. If you've ever loved people who only noticed your value when there was money attached to it, this story will hit harder than you expect. Stay with me until the end, because sometimes the quietest daughter carries the heaviest truth. 20 years earlier, Delia Wheeler was 28 years old, ambitious, exhausted, and standing in the middle of a freezing Chicago train station when her mother called crying. "Sweetheart," Evelyn whispered weakly through the phone. "The doctor found something." Everything after that moment split her life cleanly in two. Before the call, Delia had been building a future. After the call, she spent the next 20 years postponing one. Back then, she worked for a rising marketing firm downtown. She lived in a small but beautiful apartment with exposed brick walls and oversized windows overlooking the river. She had friends who dragged her to rooftop bars on weekends. She had a promotion coming. And she had Cody Bennett, funny, charming Cody, who used to kiss her forehead every morning and tell her she was going to become one of those terrifyingly successful women with assistants and power suits. But 3 days after the diagnosis, Delia packed her apartment into cardboard boxes and drove 14 hours back to Connecticut. Just until Mom gets through treatment, she told Cody. At the time, she believed it herself. Vanessa and Ryan had promised they would all help. "We'll figure it out together," Vanessa had said dramatically over speakerphone while boarding a flight to Aspen with her husband. Ryan had added, "Yeah, Dee, don't stress yourself out. We're family." Delia smiled through tears back then. She still believed those words meant something. The Wheeler home sat in one of those wealthy Connecticut suburbs where every lawn looked professionally painted and every mailbox cost more than a used car. Growing up there had looked glamorous from the outside, but inside the house appearances mattered more than feelings. Harold Wheeler had built a successful financial consulting firm from nothing. Evelyn had spent decades hosting charity galas and pretending their family was flawless, but illness destroyed performance quickly. Cancer didn't care about social status. Within months, Evelyn became fragile, tired, forgetful, and Delia became everything. Driver, cook, medication manager, insurance negotiator, night nurse, emotional support. She learned how to read blood work before she learned how to sleep again. At first, Vanessa called constantly. "How's Mom feeling? Did the doctor say the treatment's working? Tell her I'm praying." But slowly the calls became shorter, then less frequent, then mostly about appearances. "Make sure Mom doesn't tell people she's getting worse," Vanessa once whispered. "You know how people talk in this town." Ryan was even worse. He sent expensive flower arrangements instead of showing up. Wine baskets, gift cards, checks, anything that could replace presents. "Money helps too," he liked saying. But Delia learned something ugly during those years. Money never sat beside someone during chemotherapy. Money never cleaned vomit off bathroom floors at 3 a.m. Money never held trembling hands while test results loaded on a screen. Delia did. Always Delia. At first, Cody tried. He drove from Boston every other weekend. He brought takeout and flowers. He held her while she cried in the laundry room after Evelyn lost her hair. "You're incredible," he used to whisper against her temple. But caregiving changed Delia. Not all at once. Slowly. She stopped buying new clothes, stopped sleeping properly, stopped laughing easily. Every decision revolved around someone else's survival. Meanwhile, life kept moving for everybody else. Vanessa posted luxury vacations from Greece. Ryan upgraded to a waterfront condo in Miami. Friends got married, had babies, built careers. Delia learned how to refill morphine prescriptions and argue with insurance representatives who sounded bored while denying coverage. One winter night, Cody found her asleep in a hospital chair with paperwork still clutched in her hand. He stared at her for a long moment before gently waking her. "Hey," he whispered. Delia blinked awake, disoriented. "What time is it?" "Almost midnight." "Oh, God." She sat up immediately. Dad needs his heart medication at 12:30. Cody watched her rub exhaustion from her eyes. You haven't eaten today, have you? I'm fine. You keep saying that. I said I'm fine. The sharpness surprised both of them. Delia immediately looked guilty. I'm sorry. Cody sighed softly and crouched in front of her chair. You don't have to carry this alone. But she already was, and deep down, both of them knew it. Years passed strangely after that, not quickly, not slowly, just heavily. Every season blurred into doctor appointments, surgeries, medications, recovery setbacks, and moments of terrifying hope. Sometimes Evelyn improved enough to laugh over coffee in the kitchen. Sometimes Harold grilled steaks outside and acted like everything was normal. Those moments almost fooled Delia into believing sacrifice had meaning. Then another emergency would come. Another scan. Another hospital stay. Another midnight panic. And every single time Delia was the one there. Always there. One Thanksgiving. Vanessa arrived wearing a cashmere coat that probably cost more than Delia's entire wardrobe combined. Oh my God, Vanessa said while air-kissing her sister's cheek. You look exhausted. Delia had been awake for 30 hours. Good to see you too. Vanessa wandered through the kitchen examining things with visible discomfort. You should really update this place. It feels depressing. Delia stared at her. Mom almost died last month. I know. That's why I'm saying the energy in here matters. Later that night, Delia overheard Vanessa talking privately to her husband near the dining room. She's turning into one of those women who lose themselves completely, Vanessa whispered. Honestly, it's sad. Delia stood frozen in the hallway holding fresh towels. Lose themselves. The words followed her for years. Because maybe Vanessa was right. Somewhere along the way, Delia had disappeared entirely. She stopped being a daughter, stopped being a partner, stopped being a woman with dreams. She became useful. And useful people rarely got cared for, especially women. One evening, Harold found Delia sitting alone on the back porch after another brutal hospital week. Snow covered the backyard in silence. You know, he said carefully as he sat beside her, your mother worries about you. Delia forced a smile. I'm okay. No, you're not. That nearly broke her. Because nobody had said it out loud before, Harold looked older then. Smaller somehow. You gave up too much. She's my mother. And you're our daughter, he replied quietly, not our servant. Delia stared down at her trembling hands. I just didn't want you both to feel abandoned. Harold's eyes filled instantly, because they all knew exactly who had stayed, and who hadn't. A few months later, Delia secretly withdrew nearly $40,000 from her personal savings to cover a treatment insurance refused to approve. She never told anyone, not Cody, not Vanessa, not Ryan, especially not her parents. She told herself it didn't matter. They were worth it. Love was supposed to cost something. Right. But the night she made that payment, she sat alone in her car outside the hospital garage and cried harder than she had in years. Not because of the money. Because somewhere deep inside, she realized nobody would ever sacrifice for her the way she sacrificed for everyone else. Nobody. And that loneliness terrified her more than exhaustion ever had. A week later, Evelyn squeezed Delia's hand while drifting half awake after treatment. One day, she whispered weakly, they'll understand what you gave up. Delia smiled softly despite the ache in her chest, but deep down, she already knew the truth. People only understood sacrifice after they lost the person making it, and by then it was usually too late. By the 15th year of caregiving, Delia Wheeler had developed this strange ability to predict disasters by the sound of silence inside the house. The quiet always changed before something bad happened. And that Christmas, the silence felt sharp. Outside, snow covered the Wheeler estate like something from a luxury holiday movie. White lights wrapped around the trees, wreaths hung perfectly on every window, expensive candles flickered across marble countertops. From the outside, the family looked beautiful. Inside, everyone was exhausted from pretending. Delia stood alone in the kitchen at 6 a.m, basting a turkey, while simultaneously checking her father's blood pressure monitor. Her mother was upstairs resting after another round of treatment. Harold's heart condition had worsened over the past year, and yet somehow Christmas still had to look magical for everyone else. That was Delia's role in the family. Make suffering look elegant. Cody walked into the kitchen wearing gray sweatpants and fatigue under his eyes. You've been awake all night again? Delia didn't look up. Mom was nauseous. Delia, I'm okay. Cody leaned against the counter watching her silently. He used to admire how selfless she was. Now he looked at her like he couldn't recognize her anymore. Or maybe he couldn't recognize himself around her. By noon, Vanessa finally arrived. Late, of course. The front door burst open with cold air and designer perfume. "Merry Christmas," Vanessa announced loudly, removing her white wool coat like she was entering a photo shoot instead of her parents' home. Behind her came her husband Trevor carrying luxury shopping bags, followed by their perfectly dressed twin daughters, who immediately complained about the weak Wi-Fi. Vanessa air-kissed Delia's cheek. "Oh, wow," she said, pulling back dramatically. "You look exhausted." Delia forced a smile. "You already said that at Thanksgiving." "Well," Vanessa shrugged casually, "it's still true." An hour later, Ryan showed up wearing a $1,000 peacoat and talking loudly on Bluetooth about cryptocurrency investments. He hugged nobody. "Traffic was hell," he muttered while tossing his car keys onto the entry table. Then he glanced around the house. Jesus. This place hasn't changed since Obama was president. Delia inhaled slowly. "Merry Christmas to you, too." Ryan smirked. "What I'm just saying." The evening unfolded exactly the way it always did. Vanessa dominated conversations, Ryan criticized everything, and Delia quietly cleaned up after all of them while trying to keep her parents comfortable. At dinner, Vanessa launched into another story about their family ski trip in Switzerland. The resort had private chefs D. You would have loved it. Delia passed mashed potatoes down the table. "Sounds nice." "You should really travel more," Vanessa added casually. "You've become such a homebody." Cody glanced down at his wine glass. The comment stung because both of them knew Delia hadn't traveled in over a decade. Not because she didn't want to, because somebody always needed her. Harold suddenly started coughing hard halfway through dinner. The table froze. Delia immediately stood. "Dad." His face had gone pale. Within seconds, she was beside him, checking his pulse while Vanessa panicked uselessly from across the table. "Oh my God. Oh my God." Ryan looked irritated more than concerned. "Does he need an ambulance or something?" Delia ignored him. "Dad, look at me." Harold gripped the edge of the table, breathing unevenly. Cody finally stood to help while Delia guided Harold carefully toward the living room sofa. The entire crisis lasted less than 10 minutes, a mild cardiac episode. Nothing fatal. But afterward, Delia still spent the next 2 hours monitoring him, while everyone else returned to drinking wine and discussing vacation plans. That was the moment Cody quietly noticed something he'd been avoiding for years. Delia no longer belonged to herself. She belonged to emergencies. Later that night, after everyone had gone upstairs, Delia stood alone in the kitchen washing dishes. Again. Always again. The hot water burned her dry hands while laughter drifted faintly from the guest rooms upstairs. Vanessa and Ryan were probably wrapping gifts, or drinking bourbon, or sleeping peacefully. Meanwhile, Delia still had medication schedules taped inside her brain like military code. 8 p.m. pills, midnight dosage, morning vitals, insurance forms, follow-up appointments. She didn't even remember the last time someone had taken care of her. "You missed a spot." Vanessa's voice cut through the room. Delia looked up. Vanessa leaned against the doorway, holding a glass of red wine. "You know," Vanessa said softly, "I don't understand how you live like this." Delia returned to the dishes. "Live like what this?" Vanessa gestured vaguely around the kitchen. "You're 38 years old. You spend your life cleaning up after sick people. They're our parents." "Yes, and they have nurses. Part-time nurses." Vanessa sighed dramatically. "You had so much potential, Delia." That word hit harder than it should have. Had. Past tense. Like her life was already over. Vanessa stepped closer. "Can I be honest?" Delia almost laughed. "When have you ever asked permission first?" Vanessa ignored the comment. "I think you've gotten too comfortable being needed." Delia slowly turned off the sink. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means—" Vanessa swirled her wine casually. "Some women hide inside sacrifice because they're scared to build lives of their own." Silence flooded the kitchen. Delia stared at her sister in disbelief. "You think this is easy for me? I think you like being the martyr." The cruelty landed perfectly because Vanessa knew exactly where to cut. Delia swallowed hard. "You visit twice a year, and you never let anyone forget it." Before Delia could respond, Vanessa lowered her voice further. "Trevor thinks it's obvious, by the way. Obvious that you're staying because of the inheritance." The words punched all the air from Delia's lungs. For a second, she genuinely couldn't speak. Vanessa looked almost relieved after saying it out loud. There it is, she murmured. You finally heard what everyone's thinking. Delia's chest tightened painfully. Everyone. Vanessa hesitated. Too long. And suddenly Delia understood. Cody knew. Maybe not fully. Maybe not cruelly. But enough. Enough to stay silent. Enough to wonder. Enough to doubt her. The humiliation spread through her body slowly like freezing water. Because after everything, after 20 years, people still believed greed explained her love better than loyalty did. Vanessa left the kitchen moments later without another word. Delia stood there shaking beside the sink. A few minutes later, Cody walked in quietly. You okay? She laughed once. A hollow sound. Did you know? Cody frowned. Know what that Vanessa thinks I'm waiting around for money? His expression shifted instantly. Not shocked, not angry, careful. And that hurt more. Delia? You knew? No, you knew. Cody rubbed his jaw uncomfortably. I think they just don't understand why you've given up so much. Delia stared at him. And what do you think? He didn't answer fast enough. That was the answer. Tears burned behind her eyes immediately. Not dramatic tears. The dangerous kind. The kind that arrived when love quietly cracked apart. You know what the worst part is, she whispered. I would have done all of this even if there was nothing left. Cody looked exhausted. People don't really live like that anymore. The sentence settled between them like a funeral bell, because maybe that was the real tragedy. Not that Delia loved too much, but that everyone else had stopped believing love without profit existed at all. Upstairs, Harold suddenly cried out in pain. Delia moved instantly toward the stairs. Of course she did, but as she disappeared down the hallway, Cody remained standing alone in the kitchen. And for the first time in years, he didn't follow her. The first time Cody Bennett said he felt invisible, Delia almost laughed from pure exhaustion. Not because it was funny, because she couldn't imagine anyone in that house feeling more invisible than she did. It happened 3 weeks after Christmas. Snow hammered against the windows while Delia stood at the kitchen counter sorting medications into plastic containers for the week ahead. Her mother needed 8 different prescriptions. Her father needed 11. Cody walked in carrying takeout bags and irritation. We need to talk. Those words alone made Delia's stomach tighten. She looked up tiredly. Can it wait until after Dad's dosage schedule? No. Something in his voice felt sharp enough to cut skin. Delia slowly set the pill organizer down. Cody dragged a hand through his hair before speaking. I can't keep doing this. The words landed quietly, but they shook the room harder than shouting ever could. Delia blinked. Doing what? This. He gestured around the kitchen. This life. She stared at him. The fluorescent lights above them hummed softly, while snow pressed against the windows like static. I thought we agreed. We agreed 15 years ago, Cody interrupted. 15, Delia. She flinched slightly. I know it's been hard. That's not the point. Then what is the point? Cody looked at her with a mixture of frustration and guilt that had become painfully familiar lately. The point is, I don't recognize us anymore. Delia crossed her arms tightly over herself. We're going through a difficult season. No, Cody said quietly. You're living inside a permanent emergency. Silence. Heavy silence. The kind that exposes truth people spend years avoiding. Delia looked away first. Cody softened slightly when he saw her expression. I miss you. That almost broke her, because part of her missed herself too. He stepped closer carefully. I miss dinners that aren't interrupted by hospital calls. I miss sleeping beside you without hearing medical alarms. I miss conversations that don't revolve around blood pressure readings. Delia swallowed hard. My parents are sick, and I'm not blaming them. But you're blaming me. Cody exhaled sharply. I'm blaming the fact that your entire life belongs to everyone except yourself. The accusation cut deep because somewhere inside Delia feared it was true. Still, anger rose immediately to protect the wound. What do you want me to do, Cody? She asked bitterly. Walk away. No. Then what I want you to choose us too. Us. The word felt almost foreign now. Once upon a time, Delia and Cody had dreamed about children, about moving to California, about opening a small business together near the coast someday. Now their conversations revolved around oncology reports and insurance denials. Sometimes Delia wondered if their relationship had slowly drowned while she was busy keeping everyone else alive. But guilt always stopped the thought before it fully formed, because how dare she think about romance while her parents were suffering? That was the trap caregiving created. It trained people to believe their needs were selfish. Cody reached for her hand. "You know they have money," he said carefully. "You could hire more help." Delia immediately stiffened. "You sound like Vanessa." "That's not fair." "No. What's not fair is everyone thinking money replaces love." Cody's jaw tightened, and what's not fair is watching the woman I love disappear year after year while pretending it's noble. The argument exploded after that. Not loudly at first, quietly. Which was somehow worse. Years of resentment leaked out sentence by sentence. Cody admitted he felt trapped. Delia admitted she felt abandoned. Cody said he was tired of coming second. Delia said she'd spent 20 years putting everyone first, and nobody cared unless she failed. By the end, both of them looked emotionally bruised. That night, they slept on opposite sides of the bed without touching, and something between them shifted permanently. After that, Cody started traveling more for work. At least that was the explanation. Consulting meetings, corporate conferences, client dinners. Delia never questioned it, mostly because she was too exhausted to investigate anything anymore. Days blurred together inside the Wheeler house. Hospital visits, physical therapy appointments, chemotherapy complications, insurance paperwork. Meanwhile, Cody became increasingly distant even when he was physically present. He stopped asking how she was doing, stopped kissing her goodbye, stopped looking at her like she was someone he admired. Now he mostly looked tired. One rainy afternoon, Delia overheard him speaking on the phone outside the garage. I know he muttered quietly, I can't leave right now." Something about his tone made her pause. Not romantic, not affectionate, but intimate, comfortable. When he noticed her standing there, he immediately ended the call. Who was that work? Too fast, too smooth. Delia stared at him for a second longer than usual, but then her father called out from inside the house needing help, and the moment disappeared. Everything always disappeared beneath responsibility. Weeks later, Vanessa visited again, this time alone. She arrived wearing oversized sunglasses and carrying judgment like a designer accessory. Over lunch, she studied Delia carefully. "You know what your problem is?" Delia didn't even bother looking up from her soup. "I'm sure you'll tell me. You think suffering makes you valuable." Delia set her spoon down slowly. "What does that even mean?" Vanessa leaned back dramatically. "It means you wear sacrifice like a personality. I take care of our parents. And you've made it your entire identity." Delia laughed bitterly. "Easy to say when you visit twice a year." Vanessa ignored the jab. "I saw Cody downstairs earlier." Delia immediately went still. "What about him?" Vanessa hesitated just long enough to be cruel. "He looks miserable." The comment burned because Delia already knew. Vanessa tilted her head sympathetically. Men eventually get tired of women who emotionally live somewhere else. That night, Delia stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at herself for a long time. The woman staring back looked older than 43. Dark circles, dry skin. Exhaustion carved into her face permanently. When was the last time she had bought something beautiful for herself? When was the last time someone touched her without needing something? When was the last time she felt like a woman instead of a machine built to absorb pain? A few days later, Cody came home late from another business dinner. Delia sat waiting in the living room. The television flickered silently across her tired face. "It's midnight." Cody loosened his tie. "I told you I had clients tonight. You also told me you'd help take Dad to his cardiology appointment this morning. I forgot." "No," Delia said quietly. "You didn't want to go." He looked irritated immediately. "You think everything is an attack lately? Because everything feels like abandonment lately." The truth silenced both of them. Cody walked toward the kitchen before suddenly stopping. Then he turned around. "You know what he snapped." "Maybe I'm exhausted too." Delia stared at him. "You think you're the only person sacrificing I never said that? You don't have to." His voice cracked with frustration. "I've spent years waiting for us to start our lives. We have a life." "No," Cody said coldly. "You have obligations." That hurt. Deeply. Because once upon a time, Cody had called her devotion beautiful. Now he treated it like emotional damage. Delia's eyes filled immediately. "I didn't choose for them to get sick, and I didn't choose to lose my relationship because of it. The room went painfully still. Then Cody said the sentence that shattered something inside her completely. No man wants to come second to two sick old people. Delia physically recoiled, like he had slapped her. The moment the words left his mouth, regret flashed across his face, but it was too late. Some sentences could never be taken back, especially when they confirmed fears someone had buried for years. Delia stared at him with tears sliding silently down her face. Not dramatic, not loud, just devastated. Because after sacrificing everything for everyone, the man she loved had reduced her parents to a burden and reduced her love to weakness. For the first time in 20 years, Delia felt something unfamiliar rise inside her grief. Not guilt, not shame. Anger, real anger, and somewhere far beneath it. The phone buzzed against the plastic hospital chair at 2:17 in the morning. Delia almost ignored it. By then, exhaustion had become physical. Heavy, animal-like. It lived inside her bones permanently. The ICU room glowed blue in the darkness while machines breathed and beeped around her father's unconscious body. Harold Wheeler looked smaller after the stroke. That was the part Delia couldn't emotionally survive. Parents weren't supposed to shrink, not the strong ones. Not the men who once carried you on their shoulders and taught you how to drive and made the whole world feel controlled. Now Harold lay motionless beneath stiff white blankets, while tubes disappeared into bruised skin. Delia sat beside him wearing the same sweater she'd worn for 2 days straight. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago. Outside the room, nurses moved quietly through fluorescent hallways carrying exhaustion of their own. Inside, Delia held her father's hand and silently begged the universe for more time. The doctors said the next 24 hours would determine everything. Brain damage, mobility, speech, possibly survival. And through all of it, Vanessa had posted a black and white Instagram story captioned, "Pray for my dad." Ryan had sent exactly one text. "How bad is it?" Financially, Delia never answered. She couldn't, because if she started saying what she really felt, she would never stop. The phone buzzed again. This time she glanced down automatically. Cody. A tiny flicker of relief moved through her chest. Maybe he was finally coming. Maybe he realized how serious this was. Maybe he remembered how to love her when things got ugly. Delia picked up the phone weakly, but before she could unlock it, another message appeared across the screen. Not from Cody, from someone named Sabrina. Her stomach tightened immediately. Then she read the message. "Miss you already. Last night felt dangerous in the best way. The world stopped. Not dramatically, not loudly, just stopped." Delia stared at the glowing screen while her father's heart monitor beeped steadily beside her. There had to be an explanation. A client? A joke? Wrong number. But then another message appeared. "Can't stop thinking about your hands on me." The phone nearly slipped from Delia's fingers. Her body went cold so fast it hurt. For several seconds she genuinely forgot how to breathe. No. No, no, no. Not now. Not here. Not while her father lay unconscious beside her. Delia unlocked the screen mechanically. Her hands trembled harder with every swipe. The message thread opened, and her entire relationship collapsed in silence. Photos, hotel reservations, inside jokes, late-night conversations, months of emotional intimacy she hadn't received from Cody in years. One message punched through her chest harder than all the others. "Sabrina. Does she suspect anything, Cody? She barely sees me anymore." Delia physically recoiled, like the words had struck her, because somewhere deep down, that had been her greatest fear. Not that Cody would leave, but that he already had emotionally, long ago. And she'd been too busy surviving to notice. The ICU suddenly felt too bright, too loud, too small. Delia pressed a shaking hand against her mouth, trying not to make a sound. Her father was still unconscious. The nurses were still working. The hospital still smelled like antiseptic and grief. But inside Delia, something catastrophic had happened. 20 years of sacrifice. 15 years of loving Cody. And somehow, she was still the woman getting betrayed in a hospital chair at 2 a.m. The humiliation nearly suffocated her. Because Sabrina was younger. Beautiful. Polished. The kind of woman who probably slept full nights and wore perfume instead of stress. The kind of woman who hadn't spent years smelling like hospitals and medication schedules. Suddenly, Delia became hyper-aware of herself. The dry skin on her hands, the exhaustion under her eyes, the coffee stains on her sweater. Had Cody looked at her recently and only seen burden responsibility decay, tears blurred the screen. But she kept reading anyway. Pain always made people search for the sentence that killed them. Then she found it. Sabrina. "So when are you finally leaving Cody soon?" One word. Soon. Delia stared at it while her chest caved inward slowly. Not guilt, not conflict, not confusion. A plan. He had a plan, and she hadn't even noticed. A sob rose in her throat before she violently swallowed it down. Not here. Not beside her father. She stood abruptly and walked into the empty hallway before completely breaking apart. The fluorescent lights overhead blurred as tears finally spilled down her face. Not graceful tears, not cinematic tears. The ugly kind. The kind pulled from years of exhaustion and abandonment. Delia slid down against the cold wall outside the ICU and cried into both hands while nurses quietly pretended not to notice. That was the cruel thing about caregivers. People expected them to keep functioning no matter how shattered they became. Her phone buzzed again, Cody calling. Delia stared at his name flashing across the screen. Once upon a time, seeing his name had made her feel safe. Now it made her nauseous. She declined the call. Immediately another text appeared. "How's your dad?" The sheer normalcy of it nearly made her scream. "How's your dad?" As if he hadn't just destroyed her life between hotel bookings and love messages. As if she wasn't sitting outside an ICU, realizing she had lost everything at the exact same time. Delia typed 3 different responses, then deleted them all. Because she suddenly understood something terrifying. She was too tired to fight, not weak, not passive, just empty. A nurse stepped out of Harold's room a few minutes later. Ms. Wheeler Delia wiped her face quickly. "Yes, he's awake." Everything inside her immediately reorganized around that sentence. That was what caregiving did. Your heartbreak became secondary automatically. Delia stood too quickly dizzy from exhaustion and walked back into the ICU room. Harold's eyes were barely open, confused, weak, but awake. Relief crashed through her so violently she almost collapsed beside him. "Dad," his fingers moved slightly in hers. Delia smiled through tears instantly. "You scared me." Harold looked at her face carefully despite his condition. Even half-conscious, he still knew her too well. "You crying?" he whispered roughly. The question nearly destroyed her, because he thought the tears were for him, and maybe part of them were, but another part came from realizing the man she loved had emotionally abandoned her long before tonight. Delia forced herself to smile. "I'm okay." The lie tasted bitter now. Harold squeezed her hand weakly. "You stay too strong," he murmured. Delia looked down immediately before he could see fresh tears forming. "No, not strong. Just trapped. Trapped inside responsibility, inside loyalty, inside the exhausting role of being the person everybody depended on while nobody truly protected her back." Her father drifted back to sleep moments later, but Delia remained sitting beside him until sunrise, still holding his hand, still breathing through heartbreak, still functioning because someone had to. At 6:43 a.m., Vanessa finally called. "How bad is he?" she asked immediately. Delia stared blankly out the hospital window. "He woke up." "Oh, thank God." Vanessa exhaled dramatically. "I was terrified." Delia almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because Vanessa had slept 8 uninterrupted hours while Delia's entire life collapsed beside an ICU bed. "Can you come help this weekend?" Delia asked quietly. Silence. "Then I'll try, but Trevor has that charity event Saturday." Of course he did. Delia closed her eyes. Right. After the call ended, she looked down at her phone again, at Cody's unread messages, at Sabrina's heart emojis, at years of love slowly revealing themselves as conditional. And for the first time, Delia stopped asking herself what she had done wrong. Instead, a far more dangerous question formed quietly inside her. What if everyone around her had simply gotten too comfortable with her suffering? 3 weeks after Harold's stroke, the Wheeler family gathered for dinner like nothing had happened. That was the strange thing about privileged families. They could package dysfunction beautifully. The dining room looked perfect that evening. Candles flickered softly across polished wood. Crystal wine glasses reflected warm golden light. A jazz playlist drifted through hidden ceiling speakers, while snow fell gently outside the massive windows. It looked like a luxury holiday commercial. Meanwhile, Delia had slept 4 hours in 3 days. Harold was finally home from the hospital, but recovery had been brutal. Physical therapy exhausted him. Evelyn's health was declining again from stress, and Delia had become a full-time nurse without anyone officially calling her one. Her body hurt constantly now, shoulders, back, head, soul. But somehow dinner still needed to happen because Vanessa insisted normalcy matters during recovery. Easy thing to say when you weren't the one cleaning blood pressure cuffs at midnight. Delia carried roasted vegetables toward the table while trying to remember whether Harold had already taken his evening medication. "Smells amazing," Vanessa said brightly from her seat. Delia nearly laughed at the absurdity. Of course it smelled amazing. She had spent 3 hours cooking after managing hospital paperwork all afternoon. Ryan swirled bourbon lazily in his glass. "You know," he said casually, "this house could actually be worth a fortune renovated properly." Delia froze briefly beside the table. Harold looked down immediately. Vanessa sighed dramatically. "Ryan." "What?" He shrugged. "I'm just being realistic. Our father just survived a stroke, and real estate still exists." Delia sat quietly beside Evelyn, while anger crawled slowly beneath her skin. That had become her emotional state lately. Not explosive rage, constant simmering disappointment. Cody arrived late. Again. He walked into the dining room wearing a navy overcoat dusted with snow and kissed Delia's cheek automatically. The gesture felt hollow now, like muscle memory pretending to be intimacy. "Sorry," he muttered while loosening his tie. "Client meeting." Delia nodded once, no emotion, no questions. Because after discovering Sabrina, something inside her had gone eerily calm. Not healed, not forgiving, just emotionally detached enough to survive. Cody noticed the distance immediately. It unsettled him more than anger would have. Throughout dinner, Vanessa dominated conversation the way she always did. Stories about charity galas, private schools, vacation homes. Meanwhile, Delia silently cut Harold's food into smaller pieces because his hands still shook slightly after the stroke. Nobody acknowledged it. Not even Cody. That was the cruelest part of invisible labor. People adjusted to your sacrifices so completely, they stopped seeing them altogether. Halfway through dinner, Ryan leaned back in his chair and laughed. "I still can't believe Delia hasn't worked a real job in years." The comment landed hard. Evelyn immediately looked uncomfortable. Delia kept her eyes on her plate. Cody said nothing. Ryan continued casually oblivious, or maybe simply uncaring. "I mean, honestly, Dee, you're kind of lucky." Delia slowly looked up. "Lucky? Yeah." Ryan gestured around the massive dining room. "No commute, no corporate stress, free housing." Vanessa snorted softly into her wine. Delia stared at both of them in disbelief. "Do you hear yourselves?" Ryan frowned. "What? You think this is easy?" Vanessa jumped in immediately. "No one said it's easy. You just said I'm lucky." Ryan rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on. You know what I mean?" "No," Delia replied quietly. "I really don't." Tension spread across the table instantly. Harold shifted uncomfortably. Evelyn looked exhausted already, and still nobody stopped. Because families like this preferred one scapegoat over uncomfortable truth. Vanessa folded her napkin carefully. "I think Ryan's just saying you don't understand the pressure of balancing career and family." Delia actually laughed this time. A sharp, humorless sound. "You visit twice a year." Vanessa stiffened. "That's unfair. Is it?" Delia, Cody warned softly. The fact that he warned her instead of them felt like betrayal all by itself. Delia turned toward him slowly. "What exactly are you protecting right now?" Cody looked trapped immediately. Ryan sighed dramatically. "This is why nobody likes coming here anymore." That sentence almost shattered the room. Nobody likes coming here, as if illness had become an inconvenience to them, as if the emotional weight Delia carried daily was somehow ruining everyone else's comfort. Harold quietly set down his fork. "That's enough." But Ryan kept going. "I'm serious. This house feels depressing all the time." Delia stared at him. Their father had nearly died. Their mother was still sick. And Ryan was complaining about emotional atmosphere. Something inside her finally cracked. "You know what's depressing?" she said softly. "Watching people abandon their family while pretending they're still good people." Silence. Real silence. Ryan's expression darkened instantly. Vanessa crossed her arms. "Oh, please." "No," Delia continued, voice trembling now. "Please explain to me how exactly I'm the embarrassing one in this family." Delia Cody started again. "No." She turned toward him sharply. "You don't get to calm me down anymore." That startled him. Good. For years, Delia had swallowed every humiliation to keep peace alive. But peace built on one person's silence was never peace. It was emotional servitude. Vanessa leaned forward coldly. "You act like you're some kind of saint." I never asked to be, but you enjoy making everyone feel guilty? Delia blinked slowly. You think caregiving is manipulation? I think martyrdom becomes addictive. That word again. Martyr. The label they used whenever a woman sacrificed too much and finally became inconvenient to dismiss. Delia opened her mouth to respond, but Evelyn suddenly spoke first. Quietly. Firmly. Stop. Everyone froze, because Evelyn Wheeler almost never raised her voice. She looked directly at Vanessa first. Your sister sold her car 3 years ago to help pay for my treatment. The room went still. Delia's stomach dropped instantly. Mom. No. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. I'm done pretending. Vanessa looked genuinely confused. What are you talking about? Evelyn turned toward Ryan. She used her retirement savings after insurance denied your father's specialist care. Ryan frowned. That's impossible. No, Harold said quietly. It's true. Delia wanted the floor to open beneath her, not because she regretted helping, because she never wanted love turned into evidence. Vanessa looked horrified. You never told us. Delia laughed bitterly. You never asked. The sentence cut through the room perfectly. Because it was true. Nobody had ever really asked what caregiving cost her. Not financially, not emotionally, not physically. People only noticed sacrifice when inheritance entered the conversation. Ryan leaned back slowly, suddenly uncomfortable. Well, why wouldn't you say something? Delia stared at him in disbelief. Because I didn't do it for applause. Silence again. Heavy. Ugly. Cody looked at Delia differently now, not lovingly. Almost cautiously, like he was recalculating something. That made her skin crawl. Vanessa recovered first. Well, she said stiffly, that still doesn't mean you should throw your whole life away. Delia looked at her sister for a very long moment, then finally asked the question she'd buried for years. What life do you think I had left? Vanessa didn't answer, because for the first time she saw the damage clearly. The exhaustion, the loneliness, the years, and maybe, just maybe, a tiny piece of guilt. But it vanished quickly. People who benefited from someone's silence rarely like seeing their own reflection in the truth. Dinner ended awkwardly after that. Ryan disappeared into the study. Vanessa suddenly needed to take a call. Cody quietly helped clear plates without speaking. Delia washed dishes alone at the sink while tears threatened behind her eyes. Not from sadness anymore, from realization. For 20 years she had kept everyone alive emotionally, and still they spoke about her like she was wasting oxygen. A soft shuffle sounded behind her. Harold stood in the doorway holding onto his cane. You shouldn't be standing, Delia said immediately. I needed water. She dried her hands quickly and guided him gently toward a chair. Harold looked at her carefully for a long moment. Then he said quietly, Tomorrow morning I need you to drive your mother and me somewhere. Delia frowned. Where? Harold exchanged a glance with Evelyn across the room, then answered to the law office. A chill moved through Delia instantly, and for the first time she realized her parents had been watching everything too. The law office sat on the 32nd floor of a glass tower overlooking downtown Hartford. Cold, quiet, expensive. The kind of place where lives changed in whispers instead of screams. Delia drove through sleet that morning with both parents sitting silently in the back seat. Harold stared out the window with tired eyes, while Evelyn clutched leather gloves in trembling hands. Nobody spoke much during the drive, but tension filled the car heavily enough to suffocate conversation. Delia kept glancing at them through the rearview mirror. You still haven't told me why we're doing this? Harold answered without looking away from the window. Because it's time. Those 4 words settled uneasily inside her stomach. Time for what? The parking garage elevator ride felt strangely intimate. Evelyn leaned against Delia slightly for balance while Harold moved carefully with his cane. For one painful second, Delia saw them clearly. Not as parents, as aging human beings terrified of disappearing. The thought nearly broke her. The receptionist greeted them immediately. Mr. and Mrs. Wheeler. Ms. Whitmore is expecting you. Of course she was. People like Eleanor Whitmore didn't make clients wait. Delia had heard the name before. Everyone in Connecticut's wealthy circles had. Eleanor specialized in estate law for high-net-worth families, particularly ugly inheritance disputes, which suddenly made Delia deeply uncomfortable. The office itself looked intimidatingly elegant. Dark wood, floor-to-ceiling windows, Modern artwork worth more than most cars. Everything smelled faintly of expensive coffee and power. Then Eleanor Whitmore entered the room. She looked exactly like the kind of woman who could destroy someone in court without raising her voice. Mid-60s, perfect silver bob, tailored black suit, sharp blue eyes that noticed absolutely everything. When Eleanor shook Delia's hand, her gaze lingered just slightly longer than expected. "You must be Delia." Something about the way she said it made Delia uneasy, like Eleanor already knew her story. The meeting began formally. Documents spread across the conference table. Financial portfolios, trust structures, medical directives. Delia immediately shifted uncomfortably. "I really don't think I should be here for this." Harold looked at her calmly. "You should." "No, Dad. You should." The firmness in his voice silenced her. Eleanor folded her hands elegantly. "Mr. and Mrs. Wheeler asked me to review their estate plans several years ago," she explained carefully. "But recent events have prompted significant revisions. Recent events." Delia thought immediately of the dinner, of Ryan's complaints, of Vanessa calling her a martyr, of Cody sitting there silently while her family reduced her life to obligation. Her chest tightened unexpectedly. Eleanor turned toward Harold first. "Would you like to explain your reasoning in your own words?" Harold looked suddenly older in the morning light. For a long moment he simply stared at his hands. Then he said quietly, "We failed our daughter?" Delia froze. "No." "Yes," Evelyn whispered immediately, tears already forming. "We did." Delia's throat tightened painfully. "You don't have to do this." Eleanor watched her carefully. Interesting. Not greedy. Not excited. Protective. That mattered. Harold leaned back slowly. "For 20 years," he said, voice rough with emotion, "Delia gave us her entire life." Delia immediately shook her head. "You're my parents. And you were supposed to have your own future, too." The room went silent, because that was the part nobody acknowledged. Caregiving didn't just consume time, it consumed possibility. Eleanor opened a file carefully. "Your current estate plan divides all major assets equally among your 3 children." Delia nodded faintly. That made sense. That was fair. Wasn't it? Then Eleanor asked the question that changed everything. "Do you want equality?" she said calmly, "or fairness?" The room went still. Delia looked down immediately, because deep down she already knew those weren't the same thing. Harold answered first. "Fairness." Delia looked up sharply. "Dad, no." His voice cracked. "You need to hear this." Evelyn reached across the table and took Delia's hand. "You stayed." 2 words. Simple. Devastating. Tears immediately burned Delia's eyes. "You don't owe me for loving you." Evelyn's expression shattered completely. "That's exactly why you deserve more than anyone." Delia stood abruptly and walked toward the windows, overwhelmed. Outside, Hartford looked gray and distant beneath winter clouds. Her reflection stared back at her faintly in the glass, exhausted, older, sad. She suddenly realized she couldn't remember the last time someone in that family had genuinely worried about her, not what she provided, her. Behind her, Eleanor continued speaking professionally. "Your son and daughter have demonstrated limited involvement in direct care responsibilities." Limited involvement. Such polite language for abandonment. Harold let out a bitter laugh. "They visit twice a year and act inconvenienced while they're there." Evelyn wiped her eyes carefully. "Vanessa once complained the house smelled too much like medication." Delia closed her eyes. God. She remembered that. Eleanor made several notes. Then she asked quietly, and Delia Harold answered instantly, "She gave us dignity." The words hit Delia harder than anything else that morning. Not because they sounded dramatic, because they were true. She had spent 20 years trying to protect her parents from feeling like burdens, even when everyone else treated them exactly that way. Eleanor studied Delia thoughtfully. "You understand," she said carefully, "that if your parents alter the estate significantly, your siblings will almost certainly contest the will." Delia immediately turned around. "No." All 3 of them looked at her. "I don't want that." Harold's expression hardened slightly. "You don't get to protect everyone forever. I'm serious." Delia moved back toward the table desperately. "I don't want Vanessa and Ryan thinking I manipulated you." Eleanor's gaze sharpened instantly at that sentence. Interesting again. Still protecting them, even now. Delia, Evelyn whispered painfully, "They already think that." Silence. Because it was true. Vanessa and Ryan already believed sacrifice only existed when profit was attached. Nothing Delia did would change that. Eleanor leaned back slightly. "Inheritance disputes are rarely about money," she said calmly. "They're about guilt." Nobody spoke, because suddenly the room felt far too honest. Harold slowly removed his glasses. "I know my children." The sadness in his voice nearly destroyed Delia. Ryan believes success excuses absence. Vanessa believes appearances matter more than loyalty. "And what do you believe about me?" Delia whispered. Harold looked directly at her. "I believe you disappeared trying to love everyone." Delia broke completely then. Quiet tears slid down her face while years of exhaustion cracked open inside her chest, because no one had ever described her life so accurately before. Not martyrdom, not obligation, disappearance. Eleanor gently slid a tissue box toward her. Then she spoke more softly than before. "Your parents want to ensure you're protected after they're gone." The phrase "after they're gone" echoed violently inside Delia's head. She hated hearing it out loud, hated how real mortality sounded inside legal offices. "I don't care about the money," she whispered shakily. "We know," Evelyn said immediately. "That's the problem," Harold added. The room fell quiet again. Then Eleanor opened another folder. "If we proceed," she explained professionally, "I strongly recommend extensive documentation." "Documentation?" Delia asked weakly. Eleanor nodded. "Medical records, financial transfers, care schedules, witness testimony if necessary." Delia stared at her. "You think it'll get that ugly?" Eleanor held her gaze steadily. "I think grief reveals character faster than love does." That sentence chilled the entire room, because everyone there knew she was right. Harold slowly reached for the pen beside the documents. His hand trembled badly. Delia instinctively moved to help him steady it, and that tiny unconscious gesture seemed to emotionally affect Eleanor more than anything else had all morning. Because even now, even here, Delia's first instinct was still care. Harold signed first, then Evelyn. Each signature felt strangely final. Like the beginning of a war nobody wanted to admit was coming, when the paperwork was complete, Evelyn squeezed Delia's hand tightly. Now, she whispered through tears, she'll finally be protected. But Delia didn't feel protected. She felt terrified. Because deep down, she already knew Vanessa and Ryan would never forgive the truth once it had a dollar amount attached to it. Winter settled over Connecticut like a long goodbye. The Wheeler house became quieter after the meeting with Eleanor Whitmore. Not peaceful, just fragile. Like everyone inside the walls suddenly understood time was running out and didn't know how to say it aloud. Snow gathered along the edges of the driveway while Delia moved through the house carrying medications, blankets, tea trays, and exhaustion with automatic precision. She could predict her father's pain levels by the way he breathed. She could tell when Evelyn was nauseous before her mother even spoke. After 20 years, caregiving had become instinct deeper than sleep. But something inside Delia had changed too. Not dramatically, quietly, like ice beginning to crack beneath frozen water. Ever since discovering Cody's affair, she had stopped apologizing for existing, stopped chasing conversations, stopped begging emotionally unavailable people to stay kind. And Cody noticed. One evening, he found her sitting alone in the den, wrapping a blanket around Evelyn's shoulders while old Frank Sinatra records played softly nearby. Snow drifted outside the windows. Harold slept in his recliner beside the fireplace. For a brief second, the room looked almost peaceful. Then Cody ruined it by speaking. "You didn't answer my text today." Delia adjusted the blanket carefully. "I was busy." "With your parents?" The irritation in his voice made her chest tighten instantly, not because it hurt anymore, because it disgusted her now. She looked at him calmly. "Yes. My dying parents." Cody flinched slightly. The distance in her tone unsettled him more each day. Before, Delia would have softened immediately after saying something sharp. Now she simply returned to the couch beside Evelyn. Cody stood awkwardly in the doorway. "I'm trying here." Delia almost laughed. Trying. What a convenient word for men who betrayed women quietly. "What exactly are you trying to do, Cody?" He hesitated. And there it was again. Guilt. Not enough guilt to confess. Just enough to make him uncomfortable around honesty. "You've been shutting me out." Delia stared at him for several long seconds, then finally asked the question she'd been carrying for weeks. Does Sabrina know my father almost died? The silence that followed felt radioactive. Cody's face drained instantly. What she seems very emotionally invested in your schedule. For one horrifying second, genuine panic flashed across his face. Then came denial, predictable. Delia, it's not what you think. The sentence almost made her smile from exhaustion. Every cheating man in history apparently attended the same workshop. She stood slowly. I read the messages. Cody went completely still. Outside, wind rattled softly against the windows. Inside, 20 years of love finally stared directly at betrayal. How long? Delia asked quietly. Cody dragged both hands down his face. Delia? How long? A few months. The honesty hurt worse than the lying somehow, because a few months meant while her father was hospitalized, while her mother was vomiting after treatment, while Delia herself was barely surviving emotionally. Cody had found time for another woman while she struggled to keep everyone alive. Delia nodded once slowly. Okay. That response startled him. What do you mean? Okay, it means I finally understand why you stopped looking at me. Cody stepped closer desperately. It wasn't supposed to happen, but it did. She listened to me. The second the words left his mouth, regret crossed his face. Too late. Delia physically recoiled, not because he cheated, because he made himself the victim inside his own betrayal. You think nobody listened to me? She whispered. Cody's face collapsed slightly. Delia laughed softly then. Not emotionally, just tired. So that's it. You found someone easier, that's not fair. No, Delia replied calmly. What's not fair is spending 20 years carrying everyone and still ending up abandoned. Evelyn stirred slightly on the couch nearby. Both of them immediately lowered their voices. That tiny instinct hit Delia hard. Even now, even while confronting betrayal, her first concern remained protecting someone else's peace. Cody looked at her carefully. You've changed? Delia held his gaze. No, she said softly. I finally got tired. That sentence lingered heavily between them. Because exhaustion changes women, especially women who spent years overgiving. Eventually love curdles into resentment, then grief, then clarity. Cody moved toward her again. We can fix this? Delia stared at him for a long moment before asking, would you still be here if my parents weren't wealthy? His expression shifted too slowly. That was all the answer she needed. Something inside her died quietly then. Not loudly, not dramatically, just permanently. Later that night after Cody left, Delia sat in the kitchen alone drinking cold tea while snow fell outside. Evelyn shuffled slowly into the room wearing Harold's old cardigan. You're crying? Her mother whispered. Delia wiped her face quickly. I'm okay. Evelyn gave her a look almost painfully gentle. You've been saying that for 20 years. The words shattered her instantly. Delia finally broke down at the kitchen table like a child. Not graceful tears, not cinematic sobbing, just deep, exhausted grief pouring out of her body all at once. Evelyn held her hand quietly while Delia cried. For Cody, for herself, for the life she never got to live, for the woman she used to be before caregiving consumed her identity entirely. When the tears finally slowed, Evelyn spoke softly. Do you know what hurts mothers the most? Delia shook her head weakly. Watching their daughters believe love must be earned through suffering. That sentence stayed lodged inside Delia's chest permanently, because somewhere along the way she had learned exactly that. Be useful, be patient, be selfless, be needed. And maybe people would stay. Evelyn slowly reached into her cardigan pocket and removed a sealed envelope. Cream-colored. Delia frowned. What's this not yet? Evelyn pressed the envelope into her hands carefully. When the time comes. Delia stared down at it. What's inside? A truth you'll need later. The answer chilled her unexpectedly. A few weeks later, Delia ended things with Cody, not during a screaming fight, not after dramatic confrontation, quietly, which somehow hurt him more. He came over one snowy afternoon expecting another attempt at reconciliation. Instead, Delia met him at the front door wearing calmness he no longer understood. I can't do this anymore. Cody blinked. You're serious? Yes. Delia, no. Her voice stayed steady. I spent too many years begging people to value me while abandoning myself. That's not what I did. She looked at him sadly. It is. For the first time since the affair, Cody looked genuinely afraid, not of losing love, of losing access to her loyalty, her forgiveness, her emotional labor. You're just overwhelmed right now, he insisted. You'll regret this. Delia almost smiled, because men always believed women would regret choosing themselves. No, she said quietly. I regret waiting this long. He stared at her in disbelief, because somewhere deep down Cody truly believed Delia would never leave him. Women like her rarely did. Women trained to endure usually stayed until they emotionally disappeared. But something inside Delia had awakened too fully now. Pain had finally done what kindness never could. It taught her boundaries. As Cody walked back through the falling snow toward his car, Delia stood in the doorway, watching him leave without chasing after him. And strangely, for the first time in years, she didn't feel abandoned. She felt lighter. Behind her, Evelyn's weak voice echoed softly through the house. Delia. She turned immediately, still loving, still loyal, but no longer willing to destroy herself to prove it, and somewhere deep inside a new version of her was finally beginning to breathe. Harold Wheeler died on a Tuesday morning while rain tapped softly against the hospital windows. Delia was holding his hand when it happened. Of course she was. The nurses had stepped quietly out of the room after realizing the end was near. Evelyn sat in a chair beside the bed wrapped in a pale blue cardigan, looking impossibly small beneath fluorescent lights. Harold's breathing had grown shallow through the night, painfully shallow. Delia counted every inhale like she could somehow bargain with time if she paid close enough attention. Then suddenly nothing. No dramatic final speech, no cinematic goodbye. Just silence. A silence so complete it felt like the world itself briefly stopped moving. Delia stared at the monitor numbly while the flatline sound cut through the room. Her father was gone. The man who taught her how to ride a bike. The man who secretly brought her hot chocolate during thunderstorms as a child. The man who once called her the strongest heart in the family. Gone. A nurse entered quietly a few moments later and gently turned off the monitor alarm. I'm so sorry. Delia nodded automatically, but emotionally she couldn't process anything yet. Caregivers often experience grief strangely. By the time death arrived, exhaustion had already consumed most of the body's ability to react normally. She just felt empty. Evelyn broke completely, not loudly, softly, the kind of heartbreak that looked like someone physically collapsing inward. My Harold, she whispered over and over. Delia moved immediately to hold her mother together despite barely breathing herself. Because even in grief, people still needed her. The funeral happened 5 days later. And somehow, despite losing the man she loved most, Harold Wheeler's memorial service looked beautiful enough for a magazine spread. White roses, black luxury sedans, a catered reception, perfect lighting inside the church. Wealth made grief look polished, but Delia knew the ugly truth underneath all of it. Most people there barely knew who Harold had become in his final years. They remembered the successful businessman, not the frail man struggling to hold a coffee cup after a stroke, not the terrified patient whispering to Delia at 3 a.m. that he didn't want to die. Those versions of him belonged only to her. Vanessa arrived in an elegant black coat with oversized sunglasses and mascara carefully designed to survive public crying. She hugged people dramatically, held hands, accepted condolences like a politician on a campaign trail. Everyone kept saying the same thing. You're so strong. You were such devoted children. Your parents were lucky. Children. Plural. The unfairness of it made Delia physically nauseous. Ryan was no better. He gave a polished speech near the front of the church about family legacy and Harold's wisdom. At one point, he even said our father taught us the importance of showing up for family. Delia nearly laughed out loud. Showing up, Ryan barely showed up for holidays. But people nodded emotionally anyway because rich families survived on performance, and grief made audiences gullible. Delia stood near the back of the reception afterward, feeling invisible in black wool and exhaustion. People kept approaching Vanessa and Ryan first. The successful children, the polished children. Meanwhile, Delia quietly made sure Evelyn ate something and remembered her medication. Even now, even here, still caregiving. Still disappearing into support roles while everyone else received emotional applause. Then Cody appeared. Delia hadn't invited him. The sight of him standing near the entrance in a charcoal overcoat instantly tightened every muscle in her body. For one horrible second, grief made her almost want to run into his arms anyway. Not because she trusted him, because loss makes lonely people vulnerable. Cody approached carefully. "You look tired." The comment nearly made her scream. Of course she looked tired. Her father had just died after 20 years of caregiving and heartbreak, but Cody still spoke to her like exhaustion was cosmetic. Delia folded her arms tightly. "What are you doing here? I wanted to support you." The lie sounded practiced, not cruel, just convenient. Cody's eyes drifted subtly around the massive Wheeler estate during the reception, the expensive artwork, the antique furniture, the sprawling property beyond the windows. Delia noticed immediately, and suddenly Eleanor Whitmore's warnings echoed loudly in her head. Grief reveals character faster than love does. Cody stepped closer. "We should talk sometime." Delia stared at him. About what, the affair? The years he emotionally abandoned her? Or the fact that now her father was gone and everyone suddenly looked at the Wheeler estate differently? "I don't have anything left to say to you." His expression hardened slightly. "You're shutting everyone out." No. She was finally seeing clearly. There was a difference. Before Cody could respond, Vanessa swept toward them dramatically. "There you are," she said to Delia, while dabbing fake tears beneath perfect eyeliner. "People keep asking where you've been." Delia almost laughed. "I've been taking care of Mom." Vanessa's smile tightened faintly. "Well, maybe let other people help today." Other people? Interesting phrase from someone who never stayed long enough to help with anything uncomfortable. Later that afternoon, Delia found herself alone in Harold's study searching for Evelyn's medication bag. The room still smelled faintly like leather books and her father's cologne. That nearly destroyed her more than the funeral had, because grief hides in ordinary things. A jacket on a chair, reading glasses beside a lamp, a coffee mug nobody will use again. Delia pressed a shaking hand against her mouth while tears finally rose hard and fast. Then voices drifted through the partially open doorway. "Vanessa and Ryan. The property alone has to be worth at least $6 million now," Ryan muttered. Delia froze. Vanessa lowered her voice. "Not today. I'm being practical. Our father was buried 3 hours ago, and financial realities still exist." Delia's stomach turned violently. Ryan continued. "We should probably discuss selling the house before Mom gets worse. Before Mom gets worse. Not if. Before. Like they were already planning around her death, too." Vanessa sighed heavily. "Delia's going to make this emotional." "Delia makes everything emotional." That sentence sliced through her chest, because apparently 20 years of caregiving translated into emotional inconvenience to them. Nothing more. Then Ryan laughed softly. "At least now she doesn't have Dad as an excuse to stay here forever." Delia closed her eyes. Excuse. That word broke something fundamental inside her. Not because Ryan was cruel, because he genuinely believed it. He truly thought love was manipulation, sacrifice was strategy, caregiving was dependency. And suddenly Delia understood something horrifying. People who never carried emotional weight often despised the people who did, because witnessing real devotion forced them to confront their own absence. Footsteps approached. Delia quickly wiped her face before Vanessa entered the study. For one brief second, guilt flickered across Vanessa's features after realizing Delia had overheard. Then it disappeared. "Mom's asking for you." Of course she was. Delia nodded silently and moved past her sister. Vanessa grabbed her wrist gently before she could leave. "We're grieving too, you know." Delia looked down slowly at Vanessa's manicured hand, then back into her sister's eyes. "I know," she whispered, "but grief is heavier when you were actually there." Vanessa physically flinched. Good. For once, truth landed exactly where it belonged. 2 months later, Evelyn Wheeler died quietly in her sleep, and somehow the second funeral felt even lonelier than the first, because by then Delia had already lost everything else too. Her parents, her relationship, her identity, her youth. The only thing remaining was exhaustion. After the burial, while guests slowly disappeared into black cars and polished condolences, Eleanor Whitmore approached Delia near the cemetery gates. The older woman held a leather folder tightly against her coat. "The will reading is tomorrow morning," she said gently. Delia stared blankly at the rain-soaked ground. "I don't care about any of it." Eleanor's gaze softened slightly. "I know. That was the problem. Because everyone else suddenly cared very much. And somewhere behind them, Delia could already feel Vanessa, Ryan, and even Cody watching the future like hungry people staring through glass. The conference room smelled like expensive coffee and quiet hostility. Rain streaked against the floor-to-ceiling windows behind Eleanor Whitmore, while the Wheeler family sat around the long walnut table, pretending grief hadn't already turned into calculation. Delia arrived last. Not intentionally. She had spent the morning sitting alone in her mother's closet, inhaling the fading scent of lavender perfume from Evelyn's sweaters. For 20 years, her life had revolved around caregiving. Now the house felt horrifyingly silent. No medication alarms, no oxygen machines, no late-night coughing, just emptiness. And somehow that silence hurt more than exhaustion ever had. When Delia entered the room, everyone looked at her differently. Not warmly, carefully. Like she had become part of a negotiation they were all trying to predict. Vanessa sat elegantly in cream woolen diamonds subtle enough to scream wealth anyway. Ryan leaned back in his chair, checking emails between fake expressions of sadness. And Cody looked almost nervous. That unsettled Delia immediately. Eleanor stood as Delia took her seat. "Thank you for coming." Professional, controlled, cold enough to survive rich families destroying themselves over inheritance every day. Delia folded her hands tightly in her lap. "I really don't need to be here for long." Ryan snorted softly. "Well, technically you do." Eleanor ignored him. She opened a thick leather folder and adjusted her glasses. Harold and Evelyn Wheeler revised their estate plan 8 months ago. 8 months. Delia's stomach tightened instantly. That was shortly after the dinner. Shortly after the law office meeting. Vanessa straightened subtly. Ryan finally stopped checking his phone. Even Cody leaned forward slightly. The room changed. Not emotionally, financially. Eleanor began formally. The Wheeler estate includes the primary residence, multiple investment portfolios, retirement assets, charitable trust holdings, and several commercial properties. Ryan's eyes flickered immediately. Vanessa crossed her legs carefully. Delia just stared at the table. Because hearing her parents' lives reduced to asset categories made grief feel grotesque. Then Eleanor continued. Harold and Evelyn Wheeler included personal statements alongside their directives. Vanessa frowned slightly. What kind of statements? Explanations? The room went very still. Eleanor looked directly at Delia first. The family residence, including all attached landholdings, shall transfer solely to Delia Wheeler. Silence. Absolute silence. For one full second, nobody reacted. Then Ryan laughed. A sharp, disbelieving sound. What? Eleanor continued calmly. Additionally, 60% of all liquid investment accounts and full controlling authority over the Wheeler Caregiver Trust shall be transferred to Delia Wheeler. Vanessa's face lost all color. Ryan sat forward violently. No. Eleanor did not even blink. The remaining estate assets shall be distributed in fixed percentages to Vanessa Holloway and Ryan Wheeler, respectively. What percentages? Ryan snapped. 10% each. The room exploded. That's insane, Vanessa whispered immediately. Ryan slammed both hands onto the table so hard the water glasses shook. You've got to be kidding me. Delia felt physically ill. No, she whispered. There has to be some mistake. Eleanor's gaze softened slightly toward her. There is no mistake. Vanessa stared directly at Delia now. Not shocked anymore. Suspicious. Like all her worst assumptions had just been confirmed. Oh my God. Delia shook her head instantly. I didn't know. Ryan laughed bitterly. Bullshit. I'm serious. Come on, Delia. Vanessa's voice trembled with rage. You just conveniently end up with almost everything. Delia looked horrified. I never asked for this. Ryan leaned forward aggressively. You manipulated 2 dying people. The accusation hit hard enough to physically stun her. No. You isolated them for years. I took care of them. Oh, please, Vanessa snapped. You practically controlled their entire lives. Delia stared at her sister in disbelief. Controlled? Was that what 20 years of sacrifice looked like to outsiders? Control? Eleanor finally intervened. Your parents anticipated these reactions. Ryan barked another bitter laugh. I'm sure they did. Eleanor calmly removed several sealed envelopes from the folder. Each of you received a personal letter. Vanessa snatched hers immediately. Ryan grabbed his roughly. Delia hesitated before touching hers at all. The envelope simply read, For our Delia. Her chest tightened painfully. Across the table, Ryan ripped open his letter first. His face darkened more with every line. Vanessa read silently beside him, eyes growing glassy with anger. Eleanor spoke again. With permission from your parents, I will summarize portions relevant to the estate decisions. Ryan scoffed. Oh, this should be good. Eleanor ignored him completely. Harold and Evelyn Wheeler stated clearly that estate distribution should reflect direct caregiving contributions, emotional support, and personal sacrifice demonstrated consistently over 20 years. Vanessa's eyes filled instantly. This is emotional manipulation. No, Eleanor replied calmly. It is documented reasoning. Then she opened another file, and suddenly Delia understood what her parents had prepared. Medical logs, care schedules, financial records, hospital visitation history, 20 years of proof. Ryan stared in disbelief. You kept records? Your parents did? Eleanor corrected. Vanessa looked shaken now, not guilty, threatened. Eleanor continued reading. Delia gave us dignity when illness took everything else. She gave us her youth, her career opportunities, her relationships, her freedom, and never once asked for repayment. Delia's vision blurred instantly, her mother's words, her father's words. Suddenly, they felt unbearably alive again. Across the table, Ryan looked furious. Oh my God, they made her sound like a saint. Eleanor looked directly at him. No. They described observable facts. That shut him up briefly. Then Vanessa spoke quietly. So, because we had lives, we're being punished. Delia finally looked at her sister. You think this is punishment? Vanessa turned sharply. You got the house, Delia. I got 20 years of watching our parents suffer. The room fell silent, because that truth had no elegant response. Ryan stood abruptly. This is complete bullshit, Ryan Eleanor warned calmly. No. He pointed directly at Delia. She played the long game and everybody fell for it. Delia physically recoiled. Played the long game, as if caregiving had been some elaborate financial strategy instead of emotional survival. Vanessa folded her arms tightly. You stayed because you knew this would happen. Delia stared at her for several long seconds, then finally whispered, I stayed because somebody had to. Vanessa looked away first. Not convinced, just uncomfortable. Because deep down, they all knew the truth. If Delia hadn't sacrificed her life, their parents would have faced illness alone. Cody suddenly spoke for the first time. Maybe everybody should calm down. Ryan rounded on him instantly. Oh, shut up. You're just realizing your ex-fiancé's rich. The comment poisoned the room immediately. Delia looked at Cody sharply, and for one horrifying second she saw it. Calculation. Not greed exactly. Opportunity. Like part of him was already reassessing everything. The realization made her stomach turn. Because even now, even after betrayal, people still viewed her through what she provided. Eleanor closed the folder carefully. There is one final statement from your parents. Nobody moved. Eleanor read slowly. To our children, fairness is not measured by equal distance from our graves. It is measured by who stayed beside our beds while we were still alive. Silence flooded the room completely. Even Ryan couldn't immediately respond, because grief had finally collided with truth, and truth was uglier than any of them expected. Then Ryan whispered coldly, This isn't over. Delia felt dread move through her body instantly, not because of the money, because she suddenly understood something terrifying. Her siblings would rather believe she manipulated dying parents than admit they abandoned them emotionally, and people defended guilt violently when money exposed it publicly. Vanessa slowly stood next. Her mascara had finally started to run, but not from grief, from humiliation. We'll contest this. Eleanor nodded once calmly. I assumed you might. Delia looked between all of them in horror. You're really going to do this? Ryan stared directly at her. You stole our family? No, Delia thought numbly. The truth did. And for the first time in her life, the truth had receipts. The lawsuit arrived on a Thursday morning. Certified mail, cream envelope, heavy enough to feel expensive. Delia stared at it from the kitchen counter while rain battered the windows of the Wheeler house. Her house now. The thought still felt wrong. Not because she didn't legally own it, because grief made ownership feel meaningless. The house no longer smelled like Evelyn's lavender perfume or Harold's coffee brewing at dawn. The silence inside it had become unbearable at night. Sometimes Delia still woke instinctively at 2 a.m. expecting medication alarms that no longer existed. Then she remembered, and grief started all over again. Her phone buzzed. Vanessa. Delia let it ring. Immediately after came Ryan. Ignored. Then another message from Cody. Just checking on you. Delia laughed bitterly under her breath. Interesting how everyone suddenly wanted access to her emotions again once money entered the story. She finally opened the envelope. Contest of estate and claim of undue influence. The words blurred for a moment. Undue influence. Legal language for manipulation? For corruption? For poisoning dying parents against their own children? Delia sat down slowly at the kitchen table, suddenly unable to breathe properly. After everything, after 20 years, this was who they believed she was. A woman who exploited illness for inheritance? Tears burned her eyes instantly, not because of the lawsuit, because somewhere deep down part of her still hoped Vanessa and Ryan would eventually understand. That hope died right there at the kitchen table. An hour later, Eleanor Whitmore arrived personally. Of course she did. Women like Eleanor didn't handle emotional warfare through emails. She entered the house carrying 2 leather folders and an expression completely untouched by panic. Have you eaten today? Delia blinked at the question. What? Eleanor set the folders down calmly. You look faint. It startled Delia how quickly tears rose from simple concern, because lately everyone only asked what she planned to do, not whether she was surviving. I'm fine, Delia whispered automatically. Eleanor gave her a sharp look. That phrase should be illegal for caregivers. Despite everything, Delia laughed softly. The older woman walked through the kitchen, slowly taking in the untouched coffee mug, unopened mail exhaustion hanging from the walls. You loved them very much. The statement nearly shattered Delia. Not loved. Loved. Past tense. She nodded weakly. I don't understand how this became war so quickly. Eleanor looked unsurprised. Because inheritance disputes are never about money. You said that before, and I meant it. Eleanor removed documents carefully from the folder. This is about guilt colliding with proof? Delia looked down. Vanessa and Ryan really think I manipulated them. Yes. The honesty hurt more than comfort would have. Eleanor sat across from her calmly, but that belief protects them emotionally. Delia frowned slightly. What does that mean? It means the alternative is admitting they abandoned their parents. Silence settled heavily between them. Because it was true. If Delia had acted out of greed, then Vanessa and Ryan remained good people who were simply deceived. But if Delia acted out of love, then what did that make them? Eleanor opened the first folder. Inside were copies of records Delia barely remembered existing. Hospital sign-in sheets, care calendars, medical transportation receipts, pharmacy payments, home nurse schedules. Thousands of tiny pieces of invisible labor finally turned into evidence. Delia stared at them numbly. My parents kept all this for years. Why? Eleanor's expression softened slightly. Because they knew no one sees caregiving until inheritance is involved. That sentence hit like a knife. Because it was painfully true. Nobody praised the daughter cleaning vomit at 3 a.m. Nobody applauded the woman sacrificing her career quietly. People only became interested when sacrifice translated into financial value. A knock sounded at the front door. Delia frowned. I'm not expecting anyone. Eleanor already looked irritated. Cody stood outside when Delia opened the door. Rain soaked the shoulders of his coat. For one dangerous second, seeing him still triggered muscle memory inside her chest. Comfort. History. Home. Then she remembered Sabrina. Remembered the ICU. Remembered him looking at her like obligation instead of love. What are you doing here? Cody looked tired. I heard about the lawsuit. Of course he did. Wealthy suburbs thrived on gossip disguised as concern. I'm okay. He glanced past her and noticed Eleanor immediately. His posture shifted subtly, careful again. Always calculating now. I just wanted to make sure you weren't alone. The sentence almost sounded sincere. Almost. Eleanor closed her folder deliberately. I'll give you 2 a moment. No, Delia said instantly. Both of them looked surprised. Delia folded her arms. You can stay. Something flickered across Cody's face. Embarrassment. Good. For too long, Delia protected men from discomfort while drowning herself emotionally. Not anymore. Cody stepped inside awkwardly. This whole thing is getting ugly. It already was ugly, Delia replied quietly. Now it's documented. He flinched slightly. Rain tapped softly against the windows while tension filled the kitchen. Finally, Cody sighed heavily. You know, Vanessa thinks Eleanor manipulated your parents. Eleanor didn't even look offended. She's free to think whatever she likes. Cody rubbed the back of his neck. Ryan's telling people Delia isolated them. Delia stared at him in disbelief. People, Cody hesitated too long. And suddenly she understood. The rumors had already spread. Country clubs, charity boards, neighborhood whispers. Poor Delia manipulated those poor sick parents. The humiliation burned through her instantly. 20 years of sacrifice reduced to gossip? Eleanor spoke calmly. Good. Both Delia and Cody looked at her. Good, Cody repeated. Eleanor leaned back slightly. Let them talk publicly. Delia frowned. What does that mean? It means public accusations create discoverable claims. Eleanor's eyes sharpened slightly. And I have enough documentation to bury all of them professionally. For the first time since the lawsuit arrived, Delia saw something dangerous beneath Eleanor's elegance. Not cruelty, precision, the kind powerful women develop after watching too many people mistake kindness for weakness. Cody looked uncomfortable now. This doesn't need to become destruction. Delia turned toward him slowly. Interesting thing for a cheater to say. Silence. Heavy. Direct. Cody's face went pale immediately. Eleanor glanced between them without speaking. Delia felt strangely calm. Not because the betrayal hurt less, because she was finally tired of protecting everyone else's image. Cody lowered his voice. You really hate me now? Delia stared at him for a long moment. No, she whispered honestly. I just finally see you clearly. That hurt him? She could tell. Good again, because clarity was painful for people who benefited from confusion. Cody stepped closer carefully. You know I still love you. Delia almost laughed. Love. Such an easy word for selfish people. You loved having me, she replied softly. That's not the same thing. The sentence landed perfectly. Cody looked away first. Eleanor quietly gathered the folders again. Vanessa officially filed the challenge this morning, she informed Delia. Ryan joined as co-petitioner. The finality of it settled across the room. Family. Gone. Not because of money, because truth had exposed everyone too publicly. Delia suddenly felt exhausted beyond language. What happens now? Eleanor met her eyes steadily. Now, she said calmly, we stop protecting people who never protected you. And for the first time in her life, Delia realized survival and silence were not the same thing. The first box was hidden in the attic beneath old Christmas decorations and dust-covered photo albums. Delia almost threw it away. She stood in the dim light, balancing on an old ladder, while rain hammered against the roof above her. The Wheeler house felt colder lately, as if grief itself had settled into the walls. Everything echoed now, footsteps, breathing, loneliness. She pulled the heavy storage box toward her carefully and frowned at the faded handwriting across the top. Medical records keep, her father's handwriting. Something inside her chest tightened immediately. Delia carried the box downstairs and placed it gently on the dining room table where she had once served holiday dinners nobody appreciated. For several long seconds, she simply stared at it, then slowly opened the lid. Inside sat 20 years of invisible labor. Folders, receipts, calendars, insurance disputes, prescription logs, handwritten notes, every sacrifice she had made quietly while the rest of the family called her dependent. Delia sat down hard in the chair. Oh my God. There were records for everything: chemotherapy appointments, physical therapy schedules, mileage logs from hospital trips, bank transfers from her personal savings into her parents' medical accounts. Even sticky notes in Harold's handwriting. Delia stayed all night again. Delia missed another vacation. Delia paid for the specialist consultation. Her hands began trembling as she turned pages, because suddenly her parents' love became visible everywhere. Not dramatic love, observant love. They had seen everything. Every hidden sacrifice she thought disappeared unnoticed. Tears blurred the receipts in her hands. Not because of the lawsuit anymore, because for the first time in years, Delia no longer felt invisible. A second box sat underneath the first, this one smaller, more personal. Inside were old journals Evelyn kept during treatment. Delia opened one carefully, March 14th. Delia slept in the hospital chair again. Cody brought her coffee but looked sad. I think our daughter is disappearing from exhaustion. Delia pressed a hand against her mouth. Another entry. September 3rd. Vanessa says Delia enjoys sacrifice. I almost slapped her. A painful laugh escaped through tears. Then another. December 22nd. Ryan asked about inheritance before asking about Harold's test results. Delia closed the journal suddenly. Too much. The truth hurt in a completely different way when written by people who loved you. Her phone buzzed. Eleanor Whitmore. Have you found anything useful? Delia looked around the dining room covered in decades of evidence. Yes. Good, Eleanor replied calmly. Because Ryan Wheeler has financial problems. Delia frowned immediately. What I'll explain in person. An hour later, Eleanor arrived carrying more legal files in the same terrifying composure she always wore. She stopped short upon seeing the dining room. Boxes everywhere, documents spread across the table, receipts organized into piles. For the first time, even Eleanor looked impressed. Well, she murmured softly, that's devastating. Delia wiped at her swollen eyes. They kept everything. Yes, Eleanor said carefully, because your parents understood something most people don't. What caregiving becomes invisible unless documented. That sentence settled heavily in the room. Because it explained everything. The world praised ambition loudly, but sacrifice happened quietly, which meant selfish people often rewrote history later. Not this time. Eleanor sat down and opened her own folder. Ryan leveraged expected inheritance during several business negotiations. Delia blinked. What does that mean? It means he borrowed money assuming he would eventually receive a substantial portion of the estate. Delia stared at her. He used Mom and Dad's death financially before they even died. Eleanor's silence answered for her. Something cold moved through Delia's chest. Not sadness anymore. Disgust. Suddenly, Ryan's rage at the will made perfect sense. This wasn't just entitlement, it was panic. Eleanor slid documents across the table. Loan agreements, investment summaries, debt restructuring notices. Ryan was drowning financially. He never said anything. People like your brother rarely admit vulnerability until consequences arrive. Delia leaned back slowly. All these years, Ryan mocked her for staying home. Meanwhile, he built a glamorous life on debt and performance. Vanessa wasn't much different. Luxury vacations, designer clothes, private schools, image over substance, and Delia, the supposedly pathetic sister, had been the only one building something real. The realization felt both satisfying and heartbreaking. Eleanor glanced toward the sealed envelope still sitting untouched near the center of the table. Evelyn's letter. You haven't opened it? Delia looked at the envelope immediately. No. Why? Because she wasn't ready. Because grief already hurt enough. Because mothers always knew exactly where to place emotional truth. Slowly, Delia picked it up. Her hands trembled before she even unfolded the paper. Eleanor looked away respectfully as Delia began reading. My sweet girl, if you are reading this, it means they finally called you greedy. I need you to understand something before guilt destroys you the way it destroyed me for most of my life. You were never selfish. You were abandoned slowly by people who grew comfortable receiving your love without returning it. Delia's vision blurred instantly. She kept reading through tears. Your father and I watched you disappear year after year, trying to save everyone around you. We watched you apologize for needing rest. We watched you shrink yourself so others could remain comfortable. And still they asked for more. The room became unbearably quiet. Eleanor remained still across the table while Delia silently cried over the letter. You did not stay because of money. You stayed because you loved us. The others only noticed sacrifice once it had financial value attached to it. That is their shame, not yours. Delia pressed the paper against her chest. God. Evelyn understood everything, every hidden wound, every lonely night, every moment Delia questioned whether kindness had simply made her easy to exploit. At the bottom of the letter, Evelyn had written one final sentence in shaky handwriting. Now choose yourself the way you chose everyone else. Delia completely broke then. Years of exhaustion poured out of her body in violent tears. Not just grief for her parents, grief for herself. For the young woman who gave away entire decades believing love had to be earned through suffering. Eleanor quietly handed her tissues, then said softly, Your mother was extraordinary. Delia nodded through tears. She saw everything. Yes, Eleanor replied. And now everyone else will too. For the first time since the lawsuit began, Delia felt something stronger than sadness rise inside her. Not revenge, certainty, The truth no longer lived only in her memory. It existed on paper, in journals, receipts, medical logs, letters, proof, years of proof. Ryan and Vanessa could attack her character all they wanted, but receipts didn't cry, receipts didn't manipulate, receipts didn't lie. Eleanor closed the final folder carefully. The mediation hearing is next week. Fear flickered briefly through Delia's chest, then disappeared. Because suddenly she understood something powerful. For 20 years she survived impossible things quietly. A courtroom full of selfish people would not destroy her now. Eleanor studied her closely. Are you ready to let the court hear everything? Delia looked around the dining room one last time. At the evidence, at her mother's letter, at the life she sacrificed without witnesses. Then finally, for the first time in years, she answered without apology. Yes. The mediation room looked deceptively civilized. Soft lighting, leather chairs, coffee service arranged neatly beside expensive pastries nobody touched. But beneath the polished surface, the Wheeler family was preparing to destroy itself publicly. Delia sat beside Eleanor Whitmore wearing a simple navy dress and no makeup beyond exhaustion. Across the table, Vanessa looked immaculate in white silk and controlled outrage. Ryan kept checking his phone like impatience alone could intimidate reality. And for the first time in months, Delia wasn't afraid of them. Because truth changes posture. Vanessa's attorney began immediately. Our clients believe Ms. Wheeler exerted emotional control over two medically vulnerable individuals. Emotionally vulnerable individuals. Such elegant language for dying parents. Delia kept her face expressionless. Years ago, she would have cried instantly. Now she just felt tired. The mediator turned toward Eleanor. Your response? Eleanor folded her hands calmly. My response is approximately 14 boxes of documentation. Ryan scoffed loudly. This is unbelievable. No, Eleanor replied without even glancing at him. What's unbelievable is abandoning your parents for 20 years and still expecting applause. Silence. Sharp. Dangerous. Vanessa straightened immediately. We did not abandon anyone. Eleanor opened the first folder. Would you like to review hospital visitation logs? Vanessa's face tightened. We had families, careers. And Delia had dying parents, Eleanor replied evenly. The mediator raised a hand carefully. Let's remain productive. Productive. Interesting word for emotional warfare. Eleanor slid documents across the table one by one. Chemotherapy schedules, insurance disputes, physical therapy coordination, financial transfers from Delia's personal accounts. Each paper landed like another crack in the illusion Vanessa and Ryan spent years building. Ryan's attorney frowned while reviewing the evidence. This is extensive. Yes, Eleanor replied calmly, because caregiving is extensive. Delia sat silently watching their reactions. Shock, discomfort, embarrassment. Not guilt yet. People like Vanessa and Ryan didn't reach guilt quickly. Their egos protected them from it. Vanessa finally snapped first. She wanted our parents dependent on her. The sentence hung in the room like poison. Delia stared at her sister slowly. Even now, even with proof everywhere, Vanessa still chose cruelty over accountability. Eleanor leaned back slightly. Interesting argument. What's that supposed to mean? Vanessa shot back. It means your sister somehow manipulated your parents by... Eleanor glanced at the records, driving them to appointments, cleaning feeding tubes, sleeping in hospitals, and paying medical expenses herself. Ryan slammed his palm against the table. She made sure we looked bad. Delia finally spoke. No, she said quietly. You did that yourselves. The room went still, because it was the first time she'd stopped protecting them publicly. Ryan laughed bitterly. Oh, here we go. Saint Delia. Something inside her finally hardened completely then. Not rage. Clarity. You know what's amazing? She asked softly. For 20 years, I begged myself to understand why neither of you stayed. Vanessa rolled her eyes immediately. Don't do this. But now I get it. Delia's voice remained calm. You thought showing up twice a year was enough because you never intended to carry any actual pain. That hit. Vanessa's expression cracked slightly. Good. The mediator cleared his throat awkwardly. Perhaps we should focus on legal. No, Eleanor interrupted smoothly. The emotional context is legally relevant because the petitioners are claiming manipulation instead of documented neglect. Neglect. There it was. The real word nobody wanted spoken aloud. Ryan leaned forward aggressively. We are not neglectful children. Eleanor opened another folder. Would you like to explain why your father's post-stroke emergency occurred during a holiday visit, while both of you left within 12 hours afterward? Neither answered. Because there was no answer, only absence. The door opened briefly then. A home care nurse entered at Eleanor's request. Maria Santos. Delia instantly recognized her. Maria had worked with Harold and Evelyn for nearly 4 years. The older woman sat carefully and folded her hands. Eleanor smiled politely. Ms. Santos, in your professional opinion, who provided the majority of direct care for Harold and Evelyn Wheeler? Maria looked confused by how obvious the answer was. Delia. How often did the other siblings visit Maria? Hesitated politely. Not very often. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. This is ridiculous. Maria turned toward her calmly. No, honey. What your sister did was ridiculous. The room fell silent again. Maria's voice softened. I've worked with wealthy families for 23 years. Most children outsource everything once illness gets difficult. Delia looked down immediately. Emotion clogged her throat unexpectedly. Maria continued quietly. Your sister stayed. Ryan looked furious now. This whole thing is emotional theater. No, Eleanor replied. That was the funerals. That landed perfectly. Vanessa physically flinched, because somewhere deep down she knew. The Instagram grief, the polished speeches, the performative tears. All of it looked grotesque beside actual sacrifice. Then the door opened again, and Cody walked in. Delia's stomach tightened instantly. He looked uncomfortable the moment he entered the room. Good. Eleanor had subpoenaed him regarding character claims surrounding Delia's alleged manipulation. Vanessa looked shocked. What is he doing here? Providing context, Eleanor answered. Cody sat carefully across from Delia without meeting her eyes. The mediator sighed heavily. Mr. Bennett, were you in a long-term relationship with Ms. Wheeler? Yes. For how long? 15 years. And during that time, how would you describe her involvement in her parents' care? Cody swallowed visibly. She devoted her entire life to them. The honesty sounded painful coming from him. Eleanor stepped closer. Did Ms. Wheeler ever express excitement about inheritance? No. Did she ever manipulate her parents financially? No. Vanessa looked furious. Ryan looked trapped. Then Eleanor asked the final question quietly. Why did your relationship end? The room changed instantly. Cody froze. Delia closed her eyes briefly. She knew exactly what Eleanor was doing, destroying credibility through truth. Cody looked ashamed for the first time in years. I had an affair. Vanessa blinked. Ryan stared openly. Cody's voice dropped lower, while she was caring for her father after the stroke. Silence crashed across the room. Not polite silence, judgment. Delia didn't even look at him, because strangely hearing him admit it publicly no longer hurt. It just confirmed what she already survived. Eleanor finally handed Delia Evelyn's letter. Read the final paragraph. Delia's hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it. The room waited. Then Delia read aloud softly, You were never selfish. You were abandoned slowly by people who grew comfortable receiving your love without returning it. Vanessa's face broke completely. Tears spilled suddenly down perfect makeup. Not from grief, from exposure. From finally realizing the truth had become permanent and public. Ryan looked away first. Cody looked destroyed. And Delia, for the first time in 20 years, felt something unfamiliar settle quietly inside her chest. Not guilt, not shame. Peace. Because the truth no longer belonged only to memory. Now it belonged to the record. Delia folded the letter carefully and stood. I'm done apologizing for loving my parents. Nobody stopped her as she walked toward the door. Not Vanessa, not Ryan, not Cody, because some women become untouchable the moment they stop begging to be understood. And Delia Wheeler finally had. The settlement ended quietly. No dramatic courtroom verdict, no cinematic shouting match on courthouse steps, just signatures, exhausted lawyers, and the slow collapse of a family that had been emotionally broken long before money exposed it. Vanessa withdrew the contest first. Ryan followed 2 days later after his financial records became vulnerable to discovery. In the end, neither of them wanted the full truth examined publicly anymore, because the problem with lies was simple. Once receipts entered the room, performance stopped working. Delia sat alone at the massive dining table after the final paperwork was signed, staring at the silence surrounding her. The Wheeler estate officially belonged to her now. The house, the trust, the investments, everything. And somehow she still felt empty, not guilty, just untethered. For 20 years, every decision she made revolved around keeping someone alive. Now there was nobody left to save. That realization terrified her more than the lawsuit ever had. The front doorbell rang unexpectedly. Delia frowned. Almost nobody visited anymore. Wealthy people disappeared quickly once drama stopped entertaining them. When she opened the door, Cody stood outside holding flowers. Of course he did. Not grocery store flowers either. Elegant white orchids arranged by someone expensive. The kind of apology men buy when they realize consequences are permanent. Rain soaked the shoulders of his dark coat while regret sat heavily across his face. Delia felt nothing. And strangely, that hurt him immediately. I just wanted to talk. She almost said no, but exhaustion made her too honest lately. So she stepped aside silently. Cody walked into the house, slowly looking around like memory itself haunted the walls. Everything inside looked different now. Not physically. Emotionally. The house no longer felt like a hospital. Delia had opened curtains, removed medical equipment, packed away wheelchairs and oxygen tanks. For the first time in years, sunlight actually reached the living room. Cody noticed immediately. You changed the space. No, Delia replied quietly. I finally let it breathe. The sentence lingered awkwardly between them. Cody sat carefully across from her in the den where they once planned futures neither of them lived long enough to reach. I heard Vanessa moved out. Delia nodded. Trevor filed for separation. Cody looked unsurprised. And Ryan, he's selling the condo in Miami. Silence settled again. Funny how quickly glamorous lives cracked once inheritance fantasies disappeared. Cody rubbed his hands together nervously. I've been thinking about us. Delia almost laughed. Of course he had. Men often rediscovered emotional depth after losing access to women who carried them. I don't think about us anymore. The honesty visibly hurt him. Good. Not out of revenge, out of balance. For too long, Delia carried all the pain while everyone else escaped consequences emotionally. Cody leaned forward desperately. I made a mistake. You made choices? That's not fair. No, Delia replied softly. What wasn't fair was loving people who only valued me once there was money involved. Cody looked wounded instantly. That's not why I'm here. Delia held his gaze calmly. Then why now? He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. And suddenly neither of them needed the answer spoken aloud, because deep down they both knew. Cody didn't return when Delia was exhausted in hospital hallways. He returned after the estate, after the house, after the inheritance transformed her into something society suddenly considered valuable again. The realization no longer broke her heart. It disgusted her instead. You know what the saddest part is? Delia asked quietly. Cody swallowed hard. What? I would have loved you through almost anything. The pain on his face looked genuine, but genuine regret still arrived too late sometimes. You stopped seeing me as a person, she continued softly. I became responsibility to you, obligation, emotional weight. That's not true. It is. Rain tapped gently against the windows while grief moved silently between them. Not romantic grief, the mourning of a future that never deserved survival. Cody's voice cracked slightly. I still love you. Delia looked at him for a long moment, then finally answered with the truth. I believe you love needing me. Silence. Because that was it exactly. Women like Delia became emotional infrastructure for everyone around them. People mistook dependence for love all the time. Cody looked away first. What happens to this place now? Delia glanced around the house slowly. For the first time since her parents died, she smiled. Small, real. I'm turning part of it into a caregiver recovery home. Cody blinked. What? There are thousands of people destroying themselves quietly while taking care of family members. Her voice steadied with purpose now. Most of them have nowhere to rest. Nobody checking if they're surviving too. He stared at her in surprise. You already started planning this, yes. When Delia looked down briefly, the night I realized nobody was coming to save me, something about that sentence shattered him completely, because Cody suddenly understood what he had really lost. Not just a loyal woman, a rare one, a woman capable of loving beyond convenience, and he traded her for temporary validation and easier emotions. Outside, thunder rolled softly through the rain. Inside, Delia felt strangely calm, not healed, healing. There was a difference. A few months later, the Wheeler caregiver house officially opened. The estate transformed slowly during renovations. Hospital beige disappeared. Warm lighting replaced clinical shadows. Guest rooms became recovery suites for exhausted caregivers needing temporary respite. Therapy spaces replaced unused formal dining areas. Evelyn's garden became a quiet meditation courtyard filled with white roses. Delia stood near the front entrance during opening day watching guests arrive nervously. Nurses, social workers, women carrying invisible exhaustion behind polite smiles, people like her, people the world rarely noticed until they collapsed. Eleanor Whitmore approached beside her holding champagne. "You built something extraordinary." Delia shook her head softly. "No, I survived something extraordinary." Eleanor smiled slightly. Fair answer. Then the front gate opened again. A familiar figure stepped slowly onto the property. Vanessa. Delia went still immediately. Her sister looked different. Smaller somehow, less polished, no designer sunglasses, no performance, just exhaustion. Real exhaustion. For the first time in her life, Vanessa looked human instead of curated. The two sisters stared at each other across the garden for several long seconds. Neither moved, neither spoke. Then slowly Vanessa began walking toward her, and something told Delia this conversation would change everything one final time. Ketthuk Fan 14. Fan 15. What love leaves behind. Vanessa stopped a few feet away from Delia beneath the white rose archway. For the first time in her life she looked uncertain. Not elegant, not superior, not polished into perfection, just tired. The opening event continued softly around them. Caregivers wandered through the renovated estate holding coffee cups and cautious hope while piano music drifted through the garden. But for Delia, the entire world narrowed to her sister's face. Vanessa glanced around the property slowly. "You changed everything." Delia folded her arms lightly. "I had to." Vanessa nodded once. There was a long silence before she finally spoke again. Trevor left. Delia already knew wealthy suburbs circulated divorce news faster than weather reports. Still hearing it aloud changed something. Vanessa laughed bitterly under her breath. "You know the worst part?" Delia said nothing. "He said I make relationships feel performative." That landed heavily between them, because both sisters knew it was true. Vanessa had spent most of her life treating appearances like survival. Perfect wife, perfect daughters, perfect holidays, perfect grief. But eventually performance exhausted everyone around her, especially herself. "I don't know how to be real anymore," Vanessa whispered suddenly. The honesty startled Delia, not because it sounded dramatic, because it sounded sincere. And sincerity had always frightened Vanessa more than failure ever did. Delia looked at her carefully. For years she imagined this moment differently. Angrier, more satisfying. But revenge fantasies rarely survive contact with reality, because broken people still looked broken even when karma finally arrived. Vanessa's eyes filled slowly. "I hated you sometimes." The confession hung painfully in the cold afternoon air. Delia remained still. Vanessa laughed shakily through tears. "You were everything Mom loved most." "That's not true." "It is." Vanessa wiped her face quickly. "You stayed. You sacrificed. You made the rest of us look selfish." Delia stared at her sister quietly. "No," she said softly. "Your choices did that." Vanessa closed her eyes. There it was again. Truth. Simple truth. The thing nobody in their family survived gracefully. "I kept telling myself you wanted attention," Vanessa whispered, "because the alternative meant accepting that I abandoned them." Delia felt something loosen painfully inside her chest. Not forgiveness exactly. Understanding. And understanding was often more complicated. "You didn't know how to watch people suffer," Delia said quietly. Vanessa looked up sharply. "No," she admitted. "I didn't." Neither spoke for a moment. Then Vanessa glanced toward the renovated house again. "You really turned it into this." Delia nodded. "Caregivers need places to recover, too." Vanessa let out a soft, broken laugh. "God, even now you're still saving people?" Delia almost smiled. "No," she said gently. Now I'm finally helping people without destroying myself. That was the difference. Before love consumed her. Now it included her too. Vanessa looked at her younger sister carefully. I don't think I ever actually saw how exhausted you were. The sentence hurt more than cruelty ever had, because it confirmed what Delia suspected all along. Invisible labor remained invisible until collapse forced people to notice. You didn't want to see it, Delia replied softly. Vanessa nodded slowly. You're right. No defensiveness, no performance, just truth. It felt strange. Healing rarely looked cinematic. Sometimes it looked like two sisters standing quietly in a garden, finally speaking honestly, after decades of emotional distance. Later that evening, after guests left and staff finished cleaning, Delia wandered alone through the quiet house. The Wheeler caregiver house glowed warmly beneath soft golden lamps. No hospital smell, no grief-heavy silence. Just peace. Real peace. She paused in the old den where Harold once slept in his recliner after physical therapy. Now the room held bookshelves, warm blankets, and soft chairs for exhausted caregivers needing somewhere safe to rest. Delia smiled faintly. Her parents would have loved it. A small envelope sat waiting on the desk near the fireplace. No postage. Just her name written across the front in Eleanor Whitmore's handwriting. Curious, Delia opened it carefully. Inside was a flash drive and a note. Your parents recorded this shortly before Harold passed. They asked me to wait until you were ready. Delia's breath caught instantly. Hands trembling, she carried the flash drive upstairs to her bedroom. The old bedroom. Still strange, calling it hers again? Rain tapped softly against the windows while she opened her laptop, then pressed play. The screen flickered. And suddenly her parents appeared. Older, fragile, alive. Delia covered her mouth instantly as emotion crashed through her chest. Harold smiled weakly into the camera. Well, he muttered, I look terrible. Evelyn laughed softly beside him. You always hated cameras. For several seconds, they simply looked at each other lovingly. The intimacy nearly destroyed Delia, because that kind of love looked so ordinary while it existed, then became priceless once gone. Harold finally looked into the camera directly. Delia. Her tears spilled immediately. Evelyn reached for Harold's hand. If you're watching this, she whispered gently, it means we're gone. And knowing you, you're probably still trying to carry everyone emotionally. Delia laughed through tears. God. They knew her too well. Harold's expression softened. You gave us dignity, sweetheart. 3 words, but they held 20 years inside them. Evelyn smiled sadly. You loved us in ways most people never love anyone. Delia pressed trembling fingers against her lips. Then Harold said quietly, but now you need to understand something. The room seemed to stop breathing. You are allowed to stop proving your worth through suffering. Delia closed her eyes instantly as sobs broke from her chest. Because her entire life, every relationship, every sacrifice had revolved around earning love through endurance. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears too. Now give yourself the same love you gave everyone else. The video ended shortly after. No dramatic goodbye, just love. Simple, devastating love. Delia sat in silence for a long time afterward while rain whispered against the windows. Then slowly she stood, walked downstairs, and wandered through the sleeping house one final time. Moonlight spilled softly across polished floors, while white roses swayed outside the windows. For 20 years this home had witnessed exhaustion, caretaking, betrayal, loneliness. Now it witnessed something else, a beginning. Delia stopped near the front entrance and looked around quietly. No more apologizing for boundaries. No more shrinking herself to protect selfish people. No more confusing self-destruction with love. For the first time in her adult life, she belonged to herself. And strangely, that felt more healing than revenge ever could. Sometimes the people who give the most receive the least recognition while they are giving it. That's the painful truth at the heart of Delia Wheeler's story. The world often celebrates loud success, visible wealth, and polished appearances, but quiet sacrifice usually goes unnoticed until it's gone. Caregivers, loyal daughters, loving partners, and selfless people are too often treated like they are simply supposed to keep giving forever. But love should never require the destruction of your own identity. Delia spent 20 years believing that being needed was the same thing as being valued. She kept choosing everyone else first, her parents, her relationship, her family's peace, until she almost disappeared completely. And sadly, many people do the same in real life. They stay too long in toxic relationships. They tolerate emotional neglect. They overgive because they think love must be earned through suffering. But one of the most important lessons in life is this: being kind does not mean accepting disrespect. Being loyal does not mean abandoning yourself. And having a good heart does not make you weak. The people who truly love you will never only notice your value after you are exhausted, broken, or gone. Real love protects you too. Real love sees your sacrifices before they become evidence. And real healing begins the moment you stop begging people to appreciate what they were always willing to take for granted. Delia didn't win because she inherited money. She won because she finally chose herself. And sometimes that is the most powerful victory of all. If this story touched your heart, let me know in the comments. Have you ever felt invisible while giving everything to the people you loved? Your story might help someone else feel less alone. And if you enjoy emotional stories about healing, betrayal, self-worth, and powerful life lessons, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us for the next journey.